Challenger, Chernobyl, Libya, Lebanon, South Africa, Reykjavik. It's been a dramatic year. Terrorism, disasters, war, famine and drought. Just unrelated events? Or is prophecy being fulfilled? How can we make sense of the headlines of '86? The Worldwide Church of God presents The World Tomorrow. Each week, this program gives a unique understanding of the meaning behind today's world news and the prophecies of the world tomorrow. This week on The World Tomorrow, David Hulme.
What you're about to see is not just another news program reviewing the events of 1986. During the next half hour, we're going to show what lies behind the headlines, noticed and unnoticed, of the past year. Make no mistake, there is something big happening in the world today, including the beginning of a major shift in the balance of power. And it's vital to our survival to understand the seemingly unrelated stream of events that make the news every day. John Nesbitt, author of the bestseller Megatrends, said, "We're drowning in information, but starved for knowledge." And we might add, understanding. Today, we have almost instant communication from every part of the earth. We can know what's happening anywhere on earth, almost as it occurs. But we need to know more than what's happening. We need to know why. So let's recall some of the events of 1986. But instead of just reviewing what happened, let's look at the headlines of 1986 from the point of view of Bible prophecy. As we've said so many times, Bible prophecy is the key to understanding where we are and where we're headed. Those who tune in regularly to this program know that many of the leading nations of the Western world, the United States, some countries in Europe, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa are mentioned in the prophecies, and most of those prophecies are for today. Many of these nations, which are, believe it or not, the descendants of the ancient nation of Israel, are entering into a period of national decline and loss of influence. Let's see how the events of this past year show how these prophecies are being fulfilled. We'll begin with the United States. In March, U.S. warplanes attacked Libyan naval vessels and missile sites in the Gulf of Sidra. Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi had earlier challenged the United States in the Gulf after U.S. planes strayed over Gaddafi's so-called line of death. A few months later, American planes went into action against Libya again in retaliation for that nation's involvement in terrorist attacks. This show of force received wide support at home, but America's European allies, with the exception of the British government headed by Margaret Thatcher, did not appreciate this action, and they let their feelings be known. Short-term gains were made. There was a lull in terrorism, but that has been overshadowed by the widening cracks in NATO. The Atlantic Alliance has stood since the end of World War II, but many in Europe are beginning to see their American ally as impetuous and unreliable. The deterioration of the alliance and the growing spirit of going it alone by European nations is one of the most important and least understood trends in the world today. These ups and downs in American prestige were further compounded when President Reagan and Premier Gorbachev met for the second time in less than a year. This time they rendezvoused in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. As the world's attention was focused on this meeting, hopes ran high for a breakthrough in the arms race. But just as quickly as hopes rose, they were dashed as the mini-summit broke up with no agreements and a lot of finger-pointing. One of the main areas of disagreement was the Star Wars defense program. Both sides accused each other of sticking points that prevent significant arms reductions. Little realized by most people in North America and elsewhere, however, is the reaction of European leaders to the proposed cuts in ballistic missiles and especially European-based nuclear arms. Mrs. Thatcher, Chancellor Kohl of West Germany, and others expressed alarm. Their concern is that the weapons that have kept a nervous peace in Europe for the past 4 decades might be removed without consulting them, exposing Western European nations to superior Soviet conventional arms. The near miss at Reykjavik has speeded up cooperation among the Europeans on a coordinated nuclear policy. This will eventually lead to a separate nuclear third force in Europe. And now, as the year ends, President Reagan is facing the most serious crisis of his presidency. Criticism flared when a major story erupted linking secret arms deals with Iran to the release of American hostages held by pro-Iranian factions in Lebanon. Understanding where America and other major countries are mentioned in Bible prophecy is the key to knowing what these things mean. Things are going wrong for the nations that descended from ancient Israel, and there's a reason why the American and British peoples are having so many problems today. These people have been given tremendous favor, and they have been greatly blessed. But with that favor comes a responsibility, and their failure to live up to that responsibility will result in continued difficulty for them on the world scene. Until they begin to recognize their spiritual roots and attend to obeying the law of the Creator, domestic and foreign policy issues will continue to plague them, as Leviticus chapter 26 shows. America's closest ally, Britain, also experienced a turbulent year. In July, the British Commonwealth suffered a severe jolt when Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's stand over sanctions against South Africa caused the threatened breakup of that unique, friendly association of nations. Meanwhile, in South Africa, the horrible violence continued as political and racial conflict escalated with no immediate solution in sight. Australia, too, had a difficult year. Its foreign trade balance plummeted badly, especially as a result of falling world prices for its agricultural and mineral exports. Australia was borrowing up to $1 billion a month to keep things afloat. It was not so many years ago that Australia, with its newfound mineral wealth, thought of itself as the lucky country. But is the luck running out? Like America and Britain, most Australians don't know that the fortunes of their nation are intimately bound up with Bible prophecy. You simply cannot understand world events without realizing who these peoples really are and what the Bible reveals about their future. The prophecies don't only affect America and the other countries I've mentioned so far. They especially also affect Europe. For years, the world tomorrow has spoken of a coming third superpower in Europe. Bible prophecy shows that the final revival of the Roman Empire will occur in our time. The movement towards the United States of Europe took several significant steps forward in 1986. In January, Spain and Portugal became full members of the European community. Today, we begin to share a common destiny with the rest of Europe, declared Spain's Premier Felipe González. But an even more important step towards unification occurred largely unnoticed with the passing of what is called the Single European Act. This document could transform the common market by the end of 1992 into a closely integrated economic and social entity, providing the platform for true political union. Some of the provisions of the Act are very significant in the light of prophesied events. The heads of the various European nations wrote that they were, quote, moved by the will to continue the work undertaken on the basis of the treaties establishing the European communities and to transform relations as a whole among their states into a European Union. They are, quote, aware of the responsibility incumbent upon Europe to aim at speaking ever increasingly with one voice and to act with consistency and solidarity in order more effectively to protect its common interests and independence. They also resolved, quote, to implement this European Union in the sphere of foreign policy and to invest this union with the necessary means of action. The framers of this Single European Act were frustrated with the sluggish pace of unity now underway for nearly 30 years. So in an effort to speed up the process, the act prevents any one nation standing in the way of unification. At the same time, more power is being concentrated in the European courts and other institutions of the community. Where the European Court has jurisdiction, its decisions have precedence over the laws passed by the various national parliaments. The Bible long ago showed that a sign of the end of the age would be a forming of a union of European nations who would bury their differences and band together for the common good. Not every current member of the 12-nation community will be a part of that ultimate power bloc, but a united Europe has been the dream of European statesmen for centuries. Now it seems the dream is becoming a reality. Many European politicians are becoming frustrated with Europe's lack of political influence on the world scene, and increasingly exasperated with their reliance on America as senior partner in the Atlantic Alliance. Since World War II, Europe has had the longest period of continuous peace in all of its history. But memories are short. The new generation of Europeans will not be satisfied forever with the status quo reached in a war that was fought by their grandfathers. European unity will not, however, produce the results that its present political architects intend. They are well-meaning, sincere men, but the Bible shows that world events will cause this European Union to undergo a great change in character. The biblical books of Daniel and Revelation detail much of the story. Prophetically speaking, the Bible calls this end-time configuration Babylon. You need to understand more about the news than you can get from newspapers, magazines, and television. You need to know not only what's happening, but why it's happening. I want to offer you a free subscription to a magazine that does just that, The Plain Truth. It shows you the real meaning of today's news and helps you really understand. Take this latest issue as an example. In it is a special feature surveying the great challenges facing mankind today. The Plain Truth asks and answers these vital questions. Can we overcome political divisions and religious differences? Discussing the curse of war, it asks, is it possible to have a world at peace? And showing our polluted environment and upset weather, it asks, can nature's balance be restored? Along with the Plain Truth magazine, you should also request this free brochure, Where Are We Now in Prophecy? It explains in much greater detail the prophecies we've been talking about today. You'll be able to have an inside look at the future, as it'll really happen. The future not as mankind is planning, but what God says will actually occur. Be sure to request your free copy of Where Are We Now in Prophecy? 1986 was also a year of natural and man-made disasters. Now, natural disasters are predicted in the Bible. Matthew 24 and verse 7 says this, "And there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places." On October 10th, a major earthquake rocked San Salvador, capital city of the Central American nation of El Salvador. 976 were killed and over 8,000 were injured, and thousands more left homeless. A large part of the capital city was destroyed. Another natural disaster that shocked us all occurred in a remote area of West Africa, in the Cameroon Republic. A lethal cloud of gas erupted from a fissure beneath a crater lake and spewed out over the crater's walls. Before the gas dispersed, a wide area was contaminated. 1,700 people lost their lives. Entire villages were wiped out, and thousands of people have had to be evacuated. Volcanic activity isn't unusual in itself. The Earth's tectonic plates shift all the time. But don't assume that the times in which we live are no different from any other period in history. The facts, including the absolutely reliable predictions of Bible prophecy, show otherwise. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, some 3 to 5 million lives were lost in the past 1,000 years from earthquakes and volcanoes. But during this 20th century alone, more than 1 million people have died during such events. Compounding these natural disasters are the effects of man-made catastrophes. In April, one of 4 nuclear reactors at the power station at Chernobyl in the Ukraine exploded and spread death and ruin over a large area. Before 1986, the Soviet Union prided itself on its extensive and seemingly safe nuclear program. At Chernobyl, during safety testing of all things, Soviet technicians blundered by switching off emergency shutdown systems. Reactor power ran wild, resulting in a major nuclear accident. The new openness and seeming candor of the Gorbachev era suffered a major setback when Soviet officials initially denied that any severe accident had occurred. But in reality, it has been called by far the gravest crisis in the troubled 32-year history of commercial atomic power. According to Japanese news sources, this nuclear accident was believed to have released 30 to 40 times as much lethal ash as the atomic bombs dropped over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Researchers predict that radiation-induced cancer deaths over the next 70 years will exceed 25,000 people. Also, the 135,000 people evacuated in a 300 square mile area around the contaminated plant may not be able to return to their homes for at least 4 years. But even more significant is the emotional fallout. The accident at Chernobyl confirmed our worst fears. Technology can get out of control, and the nightmare scenario once reserved for science fiction is now coming true on our own television screens. Almost overnight, Chernobyl became a new word in our vocabulary, synonymous with a disaster of great magnitude. In November, a major chemical spill in the Rhine River was immediately dubbed Chernobyl. Basel, or Basel in Switzerland, is where the disastrous leak occurred. It was only one of 6 spills that poisoned this critical waterway all the way to its outlet to the North Sea. Fully 20 million people had their water supply threatened, and it's estimated that the effects of these spills will be felt for 10 years. We're going to see many more of these man-made disasters. In our effort to produce power and food for our crowded planet, we're starting to live very dangerously. Mistakes like the ones at Chernobyl or Basel show what happens when our well-intentioned efforts go wrong. Is what we're doing to solve problems becoming too dangerous? Let's now go back to those key identifying signs that Christ spoke of in Matthew 24. Let's look again at verse 7. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. Jesus wasn't talking about normal conditions, but an intensifying of them. Take war, for an example. There have been approximately 150 violent conflicts and wars since 1945. Up to 5 million people have been killed since 1980. That means as many as 2,000 people lose their lives in warfare every day. In verse 6, Jesus said that a sign of the end time would be wars and rumors of wars. Now, you're seeing that today as never before, but perhaps you aren't recognizing it. We have, an incredible ability to adapt and accept bad conditions all around us. What was grossly intolerable for previous generations is now considered quite normal. One of the more horrifying aspects of life today is the rise in terrorism. The headlines in 1986 carried grisly accounts of one outrage after another, from car bombings to hijackings, from kidnappings to assassinations. This kind of undeclared warfare cuts across nations, races, religions, and continents, although about 35% of all terrorist actions are against Americans and American property. The philosophy of terrorism was aptly stated over a century ago by the Russian prince Kropotkin. He wrote, "A single deed is better propaganda than 1,000 pamphlets." Most terrorists come from upper or middle-class backgrounds. They're idealists, well-educated, and often from professional families. Most are in their 20s to 40s and are committed to a cause, religious, national, or political. The most dangerous is the religious zealot, who's even willing to commit suicide for the cause. As the Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come." Whether we realize it or not, we're being drawn into a vortex of events that will eventually lead to the most horrific time ever known. On this program, we give you an understanding that will help you make sense of our mixed up and confusing world. While the times immediately ahead are not going to be easy, Bible prophecy shows that there is hope for all of us. God is in control, and He is working out a great plan. Bible prophecy focuses on a time called the last days, or the time of the end, the time right before Jesus Christ returns to set up His long prophesied kingdom, His world government. Students of the Bible through the ages have wondered when this time would be. God told us that we could know when that would be in Amos chapter 3 and verse 7. Surely the Lord God does nothing unless He reveals His secret to His servants, the prophets. Jesus warned us, however, that there would be many false prophets giving wrong information at this end time. In Matthew 24, verse 4, He said this, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many." Christ knew that the entire world would be deceived in the end time. The Bible shows that the perpetrator of all of this deception is none other than Satan himself. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9 records this, "So the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." Jesus warned more than 1900 years ago that there would be a deliberate, continuous effort by Satan to deceive, confuse, and mislead you. Satan doesn't want anyone to understand what's really going on in the world today. According to Jesus, we should watch for several things: a massive deception campaign, the constant threat of wars, there would be increasing famine, and widespread pestilence. Now, I haven't had time to even touch on that aspect of prophecy today, or the ongoing events in the critical Middle East. That's a subject for a future broadcast. But when the events we've talked about today begin to dominate the news headlines, Jesus said in Mark chapter 13 and verse 29, "So you also, when you see these things happening, know that it is near, at the very doors." He was speaking about the events leading up to His direct intervention in world affairs. We can see that the trends Jesus warned us to watch for as a sign of the end are present in the world today more than ever before. Jesus gave one other important point that I want to cover before I close. We find it in Matthew 24 and verse 14. "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." That's exactly what we're doing on this program. These terrible events will lead to one final traumatic period of time. Jesus said, "For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved alive. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." These are the words of Jesus Himself. You don't need to take my word for it. Look them up for yourself. You'll find them in Matthew 24, verses 21 and 22. God will allow us to go right to the brink of complete destruction. But the good news, the true gospel of Jesus Christ, is that at the last moment, after man has proven that he cannot rule himself, God will step in to halt the annihilation of all life. At that time, Jesus Christ will assume full control of all the governments on earth today. One of the greatest prophecies of the Bible, as yet unfulfilled, is found in Revelation chapter 11 and verse 15. "The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of His Christ, and He shall reign forever and ever." And this is the great hope that we have to look forward to, the prophesied kingdom of God. For those who will listen and take heed, Jesus commands in Luke 21 and verse 36, "Watch therefore, and pray always that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man." As I've said, understanding Bible prophecy is vital to knowing where we're headed. This new brochure, Where Are We Now in Prophecy, is free of charge. It'll help you make sense out of a mixed up and confusing world. The headlines we read do fit an overall pattern, but understanding where it's all leading is difficult without a guide. Bible prophecy is that guide. Here's a brochure to help. Where are we now in prophecy? Here are some of the subjects that are covered. Peace is on the way. Here's another one. You can understand prophecy. And another one, what lies ahead now in prophecy. Now on The World Tomorrow, we've nothing to sell. This brochure is yours, free for the asking, free of charge, no cost, no obligation, no follow-up whatsoever. We're simply not going to ask you for money. All you need to do is go to the telephone, and for the cost of a local call, please telephone 008-074-222. That's 008-074-222. And request, Where Are We Now in Prophecy? We have many operators waiting, but if you don't get through right away, call us again in 10 or 15 minutes. That's 008-074-222. Now, in addition to this free brochure, don't forget to request your free subscription to the Plain Truth magazine. Millions of people read this magazine every month. What do they know that you don't? The Plain Truth explains what other magazines and newspapers cannot. The Plain Truth is the only magazine on earth that gives the critical information about what the Bible has to say about current events. The Plain Truth offers you a perspective you can't afford to be without. So for a free subscription to the Plain Truth and this free brochure, Where Are We Now in Prophecy, please telephone 008-074-222. That's 008-074-222. Or if you prefer, you may write to The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales 2001. That's The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales 2001. Next week on The World Tomorrow, David Albert will discuss a problem that affects all of us who live in this frantic modern world. Stress. What is it? What